Hi, it's so great to see all of you. We'll be starting in just another couple minutes, but I wanted to check in to make sure we're all set for this presentation. Shindig was intentionally chosen for this event in order to maximize your participation, allowing you to make your own contributions, privately network with fellow attendees, or even join the stage with principal speakers. With that in mind, let's make sure your microphone and camera are all set. For desktop and laptop users, make sure you've allowed your browser access. If the system failed to detect your camera and microphone, click on the gear in the upper right-hand corner and choose the microphone and camera you're most comfortable with. If you're still having a problem, try to refresh your browser. If an issue persists, quit all other applications that might have access to your camera and microphone. Quit your browser and then re-enter the event using the same browser, or you can use a different one. Mobile users, you've got nothing to worry about. Your camera and mic will turn on automatically as needed. So one more time, if you want to engage in a private conversation with another attendee, simply click on the participant's image, introduce yourself, and enjoy the event together. Your host will be with you shortly. Have fun!
Hi, welcome to November 4th. I'm Toby Moffett. My co-host Abigail Omajolo is out today. So in place of Abby in the early part of the show, introducing the guests, we have a special treat, our producer, Olivia Columbus. We hope that you've been watching the shows. We try very hard to tackle issues that on November 4th, the day after the election, and hopefully the day after Donald Trump is gone, that there'll be a conversation provoked, a very healthy conversation, not just about rebuilding America, but about reimagining America, and a whole series and a whole long list of important critical issues. So our last show, some of you may have seen, we talked about climate and all the work that's going to have to be done to, first of all, undo as much of the Trump damage to the environment and to climate, our climate challenge as is possible, but also begin building new coalitions, new agreements, perhaps re-enter Paris. We had a wonderful activist from 350.org, the organization that's a global climate advocacy group, and we had a former mayor of a city who was the chair of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Task Force on Climate and Jobs. So if you missed that, you can go back and catch that one. We had a show on the Department of Justice and how it's been corrupted and what's going to have to be done to rebuild that with Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee, who chairs the Constitution Subcommittee on the House Judiciary Committee. And we've examined other issues as well and had a number of really great guests. So with that, we're going to look into immigration, and we're going to look into immigration from one side to the other, from immigration policies that impact poor, often desperate people trying to come to this country to build a new life and to fill jobs that in many cases a lot of other people aren't interested in taking, to companies, big institutions, companies, universities, and others that are finding themselves hampered by the Trump administration restrictive immigration policies, particularly when it comes to students, foreign students at universities, and to highly skilled labor, talented labor from countries around the world. So with that, Olivia will introduce our guests and bring them to the stage, and then we can start the discussion. Olivia?
Hi, yes. So we have three fantastic guests here with us today. Our first guest works directly with a steering committee of more than 350 CEOs, university presidents, chambers of commerce, and immigrant advocates to support the passage of pro-immigrant policy at the state and federal levels. As the executive director of the American Business Immigration Coalition, she has worked tirelessly to win public bipartisan support for common sense immigration policies to strengthen the American economy and keep families together. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca Shih. Our next guest is deeply committed to social justice and has dedicated his career to advocating for immigrant rights. As a journalist, he spent time reporting on urban policy and human rights issues and has held several positions at organizations focused on supporting immigrant rights, including executive director of Families for Freedom, where he advocated for families facing or fighting deportation. He is now deputy director of policy and communications, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, where he helps shape the organization's communication strategy. Please join me in welcoming Abraham Paulos. And our final guest spent 10 years in a variety of positions with the United States House of Representatives, most recently as Senior Counsel for Immigration Law and Policy, working on a wide range of enforcement and benefits issues. His experience includes the creation and implementation of novel and progressive programs to provide legal assistance to underserved populations, as well as extensive coalition building and advocacy in pursuit of legal and regulatory reforms. He is currently Director of Policy at the American Immigration Council, where he directs the Council's administrative and legislative advocacy and leads the Council's efforts to provide lawmakers, policymakers, advocates, and the general public with accurate and timely information about the role of immigrants in the United States. Please join me in welcoming Jorge Lowry.
We'll wait for Jorge for a moment. If we don't get him, we'll start the conversation, and then he can join us as soon as Olivia can get him up on stage. Just wait 1 or 2 more seconds.
I'm here.
So why don't we start, and then we can all welcome Jorge when he gets here. Part of our thinking about this particular episode of November 4th was to get people like you, advocates for different aspects of the immigration challenge, together in one place so that we might be able to get a glimpse of what's possible in a coalition across a broad spectrum, from, as I said at the beginning, people who are working tirelessly to prevent separation of families, deportation, and other inhumane activities by this administration. And then people like Rebecca and her group that are working at quite a different level, and to try to see what you all might have in common. So let me begin by asking each of you, what's possible if you have a Biden administration. And I think if you have a Biden administration, you'll have a Senate also controlled by Democrats as well as the House. What's possible as far as a coalition is concerned? How broad can it be? Rebecca, have you and your colleagues, you work with, as Olivia said in the introduction, you work with CEOs of 350 or more organizations, big companies, big universities, other institutions. Can you see those people and your group and people like you supporting policies that bring back some humanity into our immigration system for poor, desperate people who are trying to get here to build a new life?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me on this program. So the business community is very diverse. We welcome Democrats, Republicans, and independents, as well as immigrant-led businesses and entrepreneurs that are part of ABIC, major trade associations, financial institutions. We welcome them all. So we've been around, for the last 6 years, starting in Illinois, and now we are in Florida, Texas, and also have business voices in North Carolina, Wisconsin, and a few other states. Our business leaders come to the fight for immigrants for different reasons. Some of them you named at the top. One of our co-chairs and co-founders, John Rowe, he's a Republican CEO. He built Exelon, the utility empire, while contributing to charter schools, where he discovered that the students he was responsible for teaching could not go to college. And he was shocked. And he thinks it's economically harmful, morally wrong. And as a Republican, he thinks it's politically foolish because the country is changing. Some of the activists may not agree with him on charter schools or minimum wage, but they can work together, and we can work together on legalization of the undocumented, and the 11 million, as well as our dreamers. I think to your question about what would happen if Biden is elected, and knock on wood that he does, we really do believe that the kind of the story that will come out of the elections is because of the foolishness of the Republican Party on this issue, right? Like we remember in 2012, Mitt Romney's self-deportation immigration policy, led to President Obama winning. The Republican Party then went into an autopsy, right, of the party, what they did wrong. And one of the big takeaways was the anti-immigrant rhetoric and not embracing a broader coalition. And as a result of that, the Senate gain of aid bill did pass comprehensive immigration reform. And so, that's our hope, and that's what we will keep working and fighting for 2021. So.
I think we might be having some connectivity issues with Toby, so I'll just go ahead and jump in. Maybe we can take turns if that's okay. Can you all hear me?
Sounds like a plan.
Good. Okay.
Yep, I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, so the question of what happens ultimately next year, assuming there's a change in administration and change in control of the Senate, is at least from my perspective, it's one that's very difficult to answer. That the reality is that the rise of President Trump has had a major impact on public opinion in this country, and that's especially true when it comes to immigration issues. We're in the midst of a major political reorientation, which makes it more difficult than ever to predict what will or will not be possible, frankly, tomorrow, much less next year. So there's obviously a great deal of support for Dreamers, as Rebecca mentioned, in Congress and across the U.S., more so than ever before. And a bill providing them with a path to permanent status or citizenship would almost certainly pass if it were to come up for a vote. But the reality is that there are far more issues within our immigration system that need to be addressed. But frankly, it's unclear if the political will and space will exist to take a broader approach. We certainly hope that there will be. But from detention issues, mass incarceration, to managing the future flow of people in and out of the country, to the barriers created for people who are already here and being able to obtain legal status, there's a lot of work to be done. But frankly, there's also a lot of work that needs to be done in rolling back many of the changes that the administration has made that will require a great deal of political capital. And that will obviously impact the overall willingness of members to take hard votes in Congress on related issues. So frankly, it's unclear. We're certainly optimistic, and we're certainly driving towards positive movement at the council.
Yeah, and so with that change that we're hoping to all see, I mean, each of your organizations focuses on something very specific. What is sort of the biggest change, if you could have any, that you would love to see come out of immigration reform going forward?
I could take a stab at this and try to tie in the earlier the earlier question. I mean, I think what Toby was sort of saying about what's in a Biden presidency, what would be different, particularly for immigration issues. I mean, I think number one, we wouldn't have a white supremacist as president, so that would be kind of helpful for just the level of fear that is now going on in the country, and the level of fear that is generated by the Republican Party. And also dog whistling around racism. So that would be great. As far as policy-wise, what would we be able, as far as the Black Alliance for Just Immigration? And I think that Jorge, really brought up some really good points that we are looking at. There has been some long instilled policies and laws that are still in the United States and are still the law of the land. And a lot of it really stems out of the Clinton administration in 1996 with the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act and the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act. The point being is that the last time that immigration laws were overhauled in this country was also during the war on drugs. And so it essentially was laws that basically punished immigrants and increased the detention system in this country and increased deportation in this country. So I think one of the things is also with trying to add new legislation, I think one of the things is to rethink things and sort of say, hey, you know what, we need to repeal some of these laws that have actually been in the books, that have given rise to the largest deportation that probably any country has ever seen in the context of modern history. And I will end it there because I really want to hear what Rebecca and Jorge are looking forward to as far as a Biden presidency moving forward. And I also do think at some point we can also open it up to thinking about what happens if Trump does stay in there. Because I do believe that in 2016, there was still sort of the same vibe, like this dude's not going to win. And then he did. And so a lot of us got caught with our pants down. So I'd like to keep it a balanced kind of conversation. Obviously we want, Biden to win for our communities and for our families. But the reality is that we're probably still in the same place that we were in 2016, thinking there's no way the apprentice is going to win.
Yeah, I think just to add to Abraham, for us as ABIC, our priority in 2021, if Biden is elected, would be legalization and citizenship for the 11 million, starting with our dreamers. As a business organization, we believe in the power of the market, right? We believe that in order to grow the economy, you need workers. And by 2030, nearly the entire population growth will be from immigrants, immigrants from Asia, from the Latin American countries, from Africa. And in order to have a robust economy, as we weather and recover from COVID, we need a robust workforce. Even just my own story, my mother and father were doctors in China, and my mother specialized in pathology. My dad was a heart surgeon. But then for 19 years, my mother was here with an order of deportations, and she had to work in restaurants. And because of Congressman Gutierrez and President Obama, her deportation was overturned, and she was finally able to work in a laboratory. And so, think of someone who's a pathologist who worked as a waitress. Next time you go to a Chinese restaurant, right? That waitress could be a doctor. And in my mother's case, that was right. And so just thinking about how much of an economic loss that is for our country, not to have a rational system that creates a path to legal status and citizenship for the 11 million. So that would be our number one priority.
Yeah, for sure. Jorge, do you guys have a priority on your end?
Sure. So it's very challenging to narrow things down to a singular priority, given the state of the immigration system in this moment, right? So across the political spectrum, one of the only things that people can agree on when it comes to immigration is that the current system just isn't working for us. Obviously, people's opinion as to why and what needs to change vary, but the current system, frankly, as Abraham said, much of it has been the same and has been on the books since the mid-90s, since 1996. But since that time, we have come to realize that we made some mistakes as a nation on the criminal justice side, and we've better understood the consequences that sort of mentality and policymaking has had on Black communities and people of color generally. And reforming our laws and rethinking some of the penalties, criminal justice laws and penalties, is something that enjoys bipartisan support in this moment, right? Including to some extent by President Trump. The IRA though was in that same vein, but we haven't come around to the idea that we must also start to reconsider other laws beyond criminal justice, like IRA, that were created in the same political era, and that also create disparate consequences for people of color in this country. So, I mean, reimagining a system generally that has a greater level of respect for due process and just sheer humanity in the U.S. is something that's very important for the council. Issues of immigration detention, the way that we treat, the way that we detain people, tear families apart in completely unnecessary ways, the fact that discretion has been removed in many ways from our removal system, and people end up sitting in jail cells for relatively minor crimes, and even well after they've already paid their debt to society, is something that we're very, very concerned with and think needs to change immediately. But we're also very concerned with legalization and normalization, and rethinking the way that the people are allowed to come here and the way that people are allowed to obtain status once they're in the U.S. as well. So there's quite a bit from our perspective that needs to change.
Yeah, for sure. So Rebecca touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear from each of you. You know, obviously we're living in incredibly unprecedented times, and you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has just totally upended so many parts of our lives. But how has the ongoing recession caused, largely by the pandemic, decreased support for immigration? And how do your organizations and you as individuals try to persuade the American citizens in this time that immigration is still so beneficial to our society's stability and security? So whoever would like to take that one, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I on the recession, I'll probably leave that up to Rebecca. I feel like she's really good on the economy. The one thing I do want to say as far as legalization goes, to what Jorge and Rebecca have said about the 11 million and the Dreamers, of course, like we see immigration as a justice issue and not necessarily like completely centered as an economic issue, right? And so what that does is that gives us space to really start to look at immigration. And let's take the Dreamers, for instance, and sort of say, yes, legalization, but we need to be a little bit careful that we're not just centering it on the economy, right? This is about people's lives, people's families. And just like Rebecca shared the story, you know, about her mom, I'm an immigrant here too. I came as a refugee. And so really looking at immigration as sort of a humanitarian protection for those that are fleeing, right? We still have a moral obligation on that. And I think that I just wanted to make that point in there. And then also with Jorge talking about mass criminalization and the challenging and the reckoning of white supremacy in this country. And if you think about it, I always like to think about the 60s in which black people in this country challenged white supremacy, which also got us the Civil Rights of 1965 and the Voting Rights Act, but also the Immigration Act of 1965, right? Which then changed the face of immigrants here, right? So in 1965, about more than 80% of immigrants were white people from Europe. And in about the 90s, that completely changed, right? Until what Rebecca said now, it's black and brown people coming from Africa, South America, Asia, that are coming into this country. And so the makeup of America and what an American looks like is vastly different. And we need to sort of look at that as saying, all right, well, what are the justice issues in America that we are talking about? And how does immigration sort of play a part in that? As far as to the question around COVID-19, the Black immigrant community is definitely wrapped up in that, right? Most Black immigrants that are workers work in the healthcare industry. Almost 3 in 10 of all Black immigrant workers work in the healthcare sector. And so this is also a space in which we're really looking at as like, all right, well, we need healthcare workers right now. Not necessarily the police, which we could talk about later if you guys want to get into that. But we need teachers right now, right? And these are spaces within our society that we all benefit, right, as a community. And so immigrants are also sewed into the textile and the fabric of this country. And so particularly Black immigrants, right? And our integration is not into white America, our integration is into Black America. And so I think the changes for us that we've seen in the last 5-6 months, outside of the recession, because I think we still got a couple months to really see what that looks like, and we're in the beginning of it, but really starting to understand is like, in our society, when we're going through a global pandemic, what are really, really important things that we need? And immigrants have been essential, as essential workers to be able to get this country back on track.
Yeah, well, what's really interesting I find in this moment of COVID is that COVID has laid bare this and really debunked the myth that immigrants take American jobs, right? I mean, we have an unemployment today of 10.5, 10.7, and like historic unemployment. Even given that, there are jobs, say, the field in which Abraham just named, plus food processing, crop production, frontline work, this essential workforce that, Americans, given the unemployment, high unemployment, the availability of workers are not there to fill. And so, one of our co-chairs is Paul Damari, who's the largest tomato grower in the country. He's from South Florida. He's a Republican donor. And he tells us, the most ironic thing is that he sees farm workers, undocumented workers, now are able to carry a card from DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, that names them essential, right? So that when they're stopped by the Florida Police Department, they cannot be deported now that they're protected because they're, an essential part of our American food supply chain, as many American workers are able to work from home and be taken care of and well fed by these immigrant and undocumented farm workers. And we've seen that in the last 4 COVID packages that even American citizens who are married to undocumented were left out of COVID relief. And, this was a cruel decision made by President Trump. But we've seen that in this last round of COVID relief, you have Republicans like Marco Rubio and you have Republicans like David Perdue that are saying, no, we got to include this up to 2 million families, and Perdue's bill to allow immigrant physicians and nurses and physicians assistants to get on a path to a green card and citizenship. So in some sense that, given the kind of the last 2 nights of horrific, RNC and this narrative of immigrants, that like the reality is that COVID in some sense has really laid bare of who is on the front lines doing work, the difficult, dangerous, dirty work that native-born citizens won't do, even at 10.5% unemployment. So,
I think I'm back. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, good. I apologize to our guests and the audience. We had, just as we were starting the show, we had a horrific thunder and lightning storm here on the Connecticut shore and lost everything. So I managed to get back in on my phone, but I apologize. But I have heard the discussion through my phone while Olivia was trying to get me back up on the screen. This is very useful. Again, though, a little bit more on what a coalition looks like and who puts it together. If the U.S. Chamber, for example, decides that they want a coalition, they're not known for working very much, I would imagine, with your groups, maybe with yours, Rebecca, but not the others, not Jorge and Abraham. But who are the best people to put a coalition together that stretches across a wide swath of territory and interest? And do you foresee a coalition where the Business Roundtable supports DACA relief for the Dreamers, And do you foresee a coalition where Jorge, your group, or Abraham, your group, would lobby on behalf of reform of H-1B visas and other things that Rebecca has to be focused on? Is that realistic with a Biden presidency and a democratically controlled Congress? I guess, Jorge, you're the political guy here in terms of Hill experience. So what do you think about that?
Sure. So I mean, one thing that I'm happy to say is that the political environment of the last few years, especially with respect to immigrants, has really expanded the interest in working on these issues and has brought many more people into the work than were participating just not too long ago, right? Just a handful of years ago. It's clear that a great deal more collaboration is necessary. We absolutely need to become more collaborative in our work with others to identify problems, share ideas, conduct research, share resources. Well, one of the issues that we face as organizations that work on immigrant rights issues is that we find ourselves often competing against each other, right, for what is a limited pool of resources. And the problem with that is that it keeps us from being able to build on each other's successes, and by extension, limits the acceleration of progress. So a more collaborative approach that would call on leaders across sectors to work together to help us expand our collective resources, create a greater level of intellectual diversity, but also force us to sit down and reconsider our overall approach is critical. And frankly, the bottom line is that we need to collectively find ways to connect with people that are on the other side of this issue, and those who may not be on the other side but are just ambivalent in deep and personal ways, to speak to connect with them and to speak to common values. We have to focus on increasing the overall solidarity that people feel and creating communities, fostering communities where more and more people feel like they belong, because that's ultimately how we create or increase the likelihood that we can achieve significant and enduring change in this country.
How much is success in this area dependent upon Biden-Harris making up with the world, so to speak, and changing our image? Rebecca?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? You were cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. How much of what we need to get done on reform depends on Biden and Harris really effectively creating policies that make up with the world for the last 4 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I believe that if Biden's elected, right, there's going to be another, like what happened after the Romney loss, another autopsy, and a big lesson will be the foolishness of the Republican Party on immigration. And I think it's up to us as advocates on the business side, or, with Jorge and also Abraham on the advocate side, to really push to make sure a Biden-Harris administration will do immigration reform, starting with the Dreamers off the gate within the first 100 days, as we've seen with the Obama administration, that once we miss that opportunity in the first term, it's going to be, or even the first 2 years, right? It's going to be a lot more difficult. But I will also say, and just, I think back to Abraham's kind of question earlier, right? I think, we believe even if Trump is reelected, we, do expect that he will, to some extent, betray his anti-immigrant base. We know that there is an immigration reform proposal that Jared Kushner wants to push through. Trump has already said that DACA and TPS are his hostages. There are certain things that he wants, and he needs these hostages to trade, right? And so, his deal in terms of trading the lives of immigrants living in terror and uncertainty for what he wants in the future on immigration. Our expectation is if he were to win, there will also be an immigration fight next year. And for both scenarios, right, the economic reality is that the U.S. needs immigrants at the high and the low skill ends. in order to strengthen our nation and create jobs. So I think, more than ever, these coalitions are important. Biden's elected, got to hold him accountable, and Harris to go out with guns blazing with the best package we can get. And then I think there is an opportunity too if Trump is reelected.
Great. Let me ask Olivia, who's backstage, if we have any questions, let's bring them up, or bring the people to the stage, or bring the written question to the stage at any point. Seems like we have.
Respond to. Oh, sorry about that, Toby.
No, you go ahead, please.
So just respond to a couple of things that Jorge and Rebecca just brought up. I mean, I think when we're looking at trade-offs, right? Rebecca brought up and so trade-offs has actually been sort of the immigrant rights approach to a lot of this stuff, which makes it hard for this coalition that you speak of, Toby, right? And so it's always been a trade-off. It's like, well, here we'll deal with the dreamers, but we also want mass deportations. Right. And so this is the way that immigration has been negotiated. And this is a way that actually is detrimental to a rights movement as it is. Now, going back to your question about a coalition, I think what has been supportive and what has been beneficial is the immigrant rights movement also joining other coalitions, right? And so we've seen how the LGBTQ community, right, is also bringing up their issues, but then also bringing up an immigration angle to their issues. We see the religious movement bringing up, their angle with religious freedom against the Muslim ban. Right. And we see this in the work that we do with detention and deportation of those that have had contact with the criminal legal system and trying to bridge it with the criminal justice reform that's happening in this country that Jorge brought up. Right. And so I think that, again, from my perspective and my point of view, is that we need to broaden, right, instead of focusing so much on our insular, right, broaden the coalitions that we have outside of the immigrant rights movement. Another example is like the labor movement, right? And looking at the labor movement and sort of saying, hey, you guys have a movement here. Here's some language from the immigrant rights, or here's some language from immigrant activists that we would like you to use when you're talking about labor. And so I think that that's just one approach that has been promising in the last little bit, instead of it being a very insular type of coalition, to actually say, hey, you know what, all of these issues that we're going through, whether that's housing, whether that's the economy, whether that's, legalization or whatever have you, has an immigrant component, just like in America. There's an immigrant component to everything that we do here off the sheer fundamental basis of it being the United States of America that was, basically, whatever, founded by immigrants or whatever have you, that sort of.
Yeah, that's interesting. Olivia, if there are questions, you can come back up on stage and read them, or bring the person up on stage. You fine.
Okay, great. So we have a question from the audience, and the question is, she would like to know your thoughts, all three of you, on Trump's quote-unquote stunt this week, showcasing the naturalization ceremony at the White House during the RNC.
I'm happy to jump in if it's okay.
Go for it.
It was surprising to me to see a ceremony in the middle of a political campaign. The way that people were paraded out in front of cameras. Apparently, according to news reports, they weren't even told that they would be part of the RNC, and may not have even been told that the president would be there. So it's very concerning that the system and people that are a part of it are being exploited for political purposes. Beyond that, though, it created this great deal of cognitive dissonance in that it's inconsistent with what we've seen in recent years, right? That the actual treatment, the approach to our system of legal immigration, which came pretty close to coming to a screeching halt. Well, actually, it would have been at the end of this week, starting next week, with the furloughs of over 13,000 people that work at USCIS. 3/4 of all the personnel that work there, right? And the administration had taken a relatively hands-off approach. There wasn't a great deal of concern, at least public, something that was publicly noticeable from them in maintaining operations so that people that wish to naturalize can continue to do so in a timely manner. So it was just, it was disheartening to see.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jorge. I think it was, well, there's obviously the issue of consent, right? And you're talking about vulnerable people that are finally getting their U.S. citizenship and them not knowing, right? But then them probably not being able to say no, considering that, the fate of their lives is in this person's hand. And I think with the Republican National Convention, just in general, it's probably the closest I will ever get to a Ku Klux Klan meeting. Just with the sort of the fear mongering and just the dog whistling and whatever have you. So that stunt, which is what it is, and the reader was right, or the person that asked the question was right, that it was a stunt. But the whole debacle of the RNC, it fits in there. And I also felt the same way when they parade Black people up there, right, to talk on behalf of Trump, saying, I know racism and he's not a racist. So I just think that, like, it just kind of goes to show the tone deafness that this party has. It also shows how white supremacists that they hold so close and so dear. So that stunt was a part of a larger picture, which is, again, the closest I'll get to a type of meeting.
Great. So we have another audience question. What do your organizations recommend we do to immediately and effectively tackle the immigration court backlog issue with over 1 million cases currently in the queue?
I'm going to allow that to Jorge.
Jorge, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure. Sorry, I was having a hard time getting off of mute.
No problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a major issue, and it's a growing issue that has been impacted by COVID-19, right? Because of the closure of courts across the country, some of them coming back online now. It's something that our partner organization, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, has been very involved in, and it's something that we're going to continue to work on in the near future and well into next year. The issue, though, is that the current approach of creating quotas, of having a ticker on judges' screens, of tying a judge's performance evaluation to the number of cases that they actually close, of reorienting the power structure, not just within the immigration court, but within the Board of Immigration Appeals, to give political actors a great deal of say over individual cases. That's an approach that we absolutely need to walk away from and reconsider entirely, right? We need to consider dedicating increased resources to the immigration courts, but also ensure that they're used in a sensible manner, that we aren't hiring judges that either have no immigration law experience whatsoever or are solely taken from the ranks of immigration and customs enforcement. So you're taking prosecutors and then making them judges and populating the bench across the board that way. It's a big issue, and it's something that needs to be tackled through legislation and also through the appropriations process, starting in fiscal year 2021.
Yeah, so we have one more audience question, and it kind of relates to something Abraham mentioned earlier about organizations needing to work together. So what tension do you guys notice between national organizations focusing on immigration reform and local and state-based organizations, and how you think we can work through that tension to more cohesively work together towards a common goal?
I can take a stab at that first. So our experience has been and really over the last 4 years since this administration has been focusing on the states like Texas and Florida, where we've seen Trump like governors or deputy governors advancing show me your paper bills, anti-sanctuary bills, and working with advocates, with the faith community, the immigrant rights community, the labor unions to build a coalition to defeat those measures. And we've been fairly successful in stopping the repeal of in-state tuition in Texas, stopping and really watering down, or first stopping the show me your papers in Florida, and then watering down the mandatory E-Verify, which became just mandatory I-9 for all, which is the status quo anyways. But yeah, I mean, it definitely took a lot of just trust building and an active campaign of moving votes on both sides, and communications, and knowing and understanding that we have a common goal, but we're going to speak in different voices and have different relationships, but that our end game of defeating these horrible anti-immigrant measures are the same. And I would say that has translated, at least for us, ABIC, this last 6 months during the COVID package fights to make it immigrant inclusive, building off of the state work that we did, since a lot of these state-based immigrant rights organizations also have their national affiliation. I think that the trust that we build locally has translated into greater partnership nationally to now, we're trying to get making sure that immigrants are included in this upcoming COVID package.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. That was great. Thank you all for this. I hope that through your organizations, for those who weren't able to tune in, you'll have your recording of this, which we'll provide and share it. I think it certainly speaks volumes about the important work that all three of these organizations are doing, and that you as leaders in those organizations are doing. So thank you, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you. It was great being on, Rebecca, Jorge. Nice meeting you guys.
Nice to meet you too. Say hi to Nana.
Yeah, I will. Okay, yeah, absolutely. All right, Rebecca, thanks.
Well done, guys.
All right.